We Free Kings by J. M. Bullen. Chapter 2, 9:15 to 11:30 p.m. Within a mile into their schlep along the inhospitable country road, all four prisoners agreed that gloves represented the greatest and sadly scarcest invention of humanity, with hats running a close second. The east wind appeared to be hounding them, with barrage after barrage of icy slicing gusts that seemed barely hindered by well-tailored suit or standard-issue prison togs. Shuffling along the tarmac, their hands tucked deep into their armpits and their heads drawn down low into hunched shoulders, the four inmates resembled a necklace species of humanoid on pilgrimage to follow a star, or to find an inn, a stable, or shelter of any kind. Even though he'd come from court that afternoon in his suit, and therefore his own clothes with shirt, waistcoat and jacket afforded him the greatest amount of protection of all of them, it was Robin Mantle, the fraudster, who complained most about the cold. In contrast, Rafferty East, Marley Jakes and Cosmo Shanks endured, huffing out occasional sighs or grimacing and snarling as each assault from the east wind tore through them. "We should have stayed with the van," Robin Mantle repeated for at least the fourth time. "Or we should have conducted a thorough search of the vehicle for blankets or spare clothing, or we should have taken the prison guards' jackets." "Leaving two unconscious men to freeze," replied Cosmo Shanks. "I'm sure our resentencing the judge would have been very sympathetic to such actions." "There weren't any blankets or spare clothes," Rafferty East added. "We checked. One of us could have had butcher's sweatshirt, or torn off parts of it." Mantle's voice tailed off under the glares of his three companions. "I bet your clobber is warmer than my clothes." "I bet you your jacket they're not." Marley Jakes matched the race and upped the stakes. Robin Mantle did not take the wager. It only took a mile and a half of walking for the group to begin shivering, and no one seemed overly inclined to follow Cosmo Shank's cheerleading advice of marching more briskly a second time. The cold became profound and overwhelming, seeping into their muscles and laying siege to their nervous systems. At first, the idea of heat was an abstract idea, like the notion of flying unaided. Then it became a spiritual zeal, as if faith in the thought of heat might ignite some sort of warmth into existence. Finally, houses appeared, and their spirits rose. The first was a tidy cottage set a little way back from the road, but was clearly unoccupied, for that night at least, for not a single light shone out from within it, a fact confirmed once Cosmo had hammered on the door. The second house was far more flamboyant than the first, being festooned with different coloured lights that blinked invitingly in a reassuring semaphore. In one corner of the garden was a nativity scene, with illuminated models of Mary, Joseph and the baby in the manger radiating their own inner light and holiness, as they sheltered in front of a shed as if awaiting shepherds and wise men. "Damn LED lights and their energy efficiency," muttered Cosmo, after failing to warm his hands on bulbs that rainbowed through a palette of colours. No one answered the front door of that house either, although Marley Jakes claimed there was movement from a darkened upstairs room. The third house they passed was brazen in its warmth and coziness. Knocking on that door resulted in the elderly male owner peering through a curtain in the front room and threatening to call the police. "We want you to call the police! We're begging you to call the police!" Cosmo bellowed back. He resorted to opening the letterbox and shouting through it. "You don't want to open the door, we understand, but will you tell the police a prison van has crashed about 2 miles up this road? If they look for 2 bandages tied to a tree branch on the southern lane, lie about 40 feet off the road, buried in the forest. 2 of them are unconscious, and we don't want them to die of the cold. Will you tell the police that? And tell them we're not on the run. We're just seeking warmth and shelter. Will you do that, please?" Being offered no shelter, the 4 men shuffled away and back along the road, heading towards the city. Such icy reactions became something of a pattern with the next few houses they called upon too. However, having bellowed out the situation with the prison van through a handful of letterboxes, Cosmo reckoned that enough people must have phoned the police about them, if not their story, and that the authorities were almost certainly dispatching people to locate the vehicle or themselves, or both, even now. Their duty discharged, the four of them now sought sanctuary from a bleak midwinter night. Before long, they were shuffling towards a tree-lined park, on one side of which was a car park containing a metal bin in which people could bag and ditch their discarded clothes for charity. "Well, we are the needy after all," declared Cosmo, tugging hard on handles and rattling the padlock. "It's not stealing, it's survival." However, there was no way even the slim form of Marley Jakes could negotiate the hinged slot through which people posted the clothes. Filching a couple of Christmas lights draped over nearby garden trees, they looped the cables around the handle of the charity bin and tugged hard. However, even when Robin Mantle deigned to help them, the four of them still stood no chance against the metal bin and simply destroyed the lights in the process. "Who knew people's cast-offs are so valuable? That's worth this protection," Robin Mantle said with genuine surprise. "We're going to need something a bit more heft," sighed Cosmo, eyeing the padlock on the charity bin with a professional gaze. "On back to that garden with the nativity scene." "How will that accomplish anything?" "Because, Robin," Cosmo slid off the name, "that nativity scene was in front of a shed with no real lock to speak of. Sheds tend to have tools. You all stay here. This wise man will go test his talents and lift us a crowbar, hacksaw, or something, before we end up exposed and stiff for all the wrong reasons." Huddling on the leeward side of the charity bin, the three remaining convicts could not work out whether it was better to keep moving and generate at least some internal muscular heat, or to preserve their energy and confront the leeching cold in stationary discomfort. Robin Mantle paced up and down as if furious with the wind, whilst Marley Jakes and Rafferty East had wrestled their arms from out the sleeves of their sweatshirts to allow their hands to clasp their own upper bodies. Rafferty East mechanically stamped his feet, but appeared to be the one least affected by the cold. His concerns were beyond mere physical distress, as he constantly peered towards the south and the city, seeking some symbol of the hospital or a heavy indication of a birth. "Well, at least it's not raining," Marley Jakes tried to grin through clenched teeth. "Don't tempt fate," warned Robin Mantle. "Once they get these clothes out, you should just take off, Raff," Marley declared. "You applied for and got compassionate leave, didn't you? Take one sort of a judge to sentence you to extra months for going AWOL to attend the birth of your child. It's not as if they wouldn't know where to find you." "Why do the crime, if you knew you were going to have a child?" Robin Mantle asked. "Found out she was pregnant 10 days after the sentencing. You don't think I wouldn't change it all if I'd known?" Mantle chose not to reply. "Marley, you're trembling. Come here." Rafferty East thrust his arms back through his sleeves and swamped the slight Marley Jakes in an embrace, rubbing his hands spiritedly against the slenderer person's back as some respite from against the cold. Jakes appeared to bask in the contact. A couple of well-insulated dog walkers passed them by, along with some disconsolate-looking teenagers in clothes that were just on the wrong side of the trendy versus cosy continuum. Finally, a cheerful, ruddy-faced family appeared, off to visit relatives or friends, or perhaps visit carol singing upon the local neighbourhood. "What's your story, then?" asked Robin Mantle to Marley Jakes. "Same as you. Fraud." Mantle looked astonished and intrigued. "What did you do?" "Official version, benefits fraud." Mantle seemed reassured by the response and nodded his head superciliously. "Why the disdain, fellow fraudster?" Jakes responded. "Well, it's not quite the same as me, is it?" Mantle replied with an ironic glance in Jakes' direction. "Isn't it? Why?" asked East. Mantle looked astonished and more than a smidgen insulted by the questions. "Well, I did something it has been judged I should not have, but I'm hardly a specimen of one of the benefits cheats fleeting this country, am I?" "And what are you? Fraudster? Tax evader? Conning middle-aged workers out of their pensions?" Jake shot back, stepping away from East, indignation generating his own heat. "What was on your buffet, Robin? Ponzi's? Pyramids? Or did we go for a touch of the exotic, darling? Squirreling the money away to stash it in offshore accounts?" Mantle chose not to answer, but cast Marley Jakes a furious look as an answer. "Sheesh, Cosmo, that was quick," Rafferty East declared. "For an old lag, you're not only light-fingered, but light on your feet." Cosmo Shanks emerged from the park with a stunned expression on his face and something unyielding clumsily concealed beneath one rigid arm. Strangest thing, Cosmo began, holding up a hacksaw. I was traipsing my way back to the house with the nativity scene when I found this on a nearby garden wall, a few 100 yards away. Nothing else, just this, like a present, waiting for me to claim it. We can discuss the miracle of Our Lady of Ironmongery later, Mantle complained. Get on, open this up. The hacksaw made short work of the arms of the padlock on the charity bin. Although they were making a din and clearly up to something nefarious, only the teenagers concealed within the darkness of the park witnessed them, and they made no attempt to intervene. With numb fingers, the prisoners prized open the metal door in the back of the bin and tore into the plastic bin liners, seeking anything that might provide warmth, little heeding how ridiculous they looked in their mix-and-match garb. After finding and donning a pair of gravestone-cold jeans, a cabernet jumper and a peacoat over his prison gear, Rafferty East caught sight of some soft muzzle peeking from out of a toddler-sized coat pocket. Removing it, he found himself holding a small, stuffed toy lamb and wondered if some little boy or girl was still missing it. If he took the toy, at least it would no longer be lost. To one side of Rafferty, Robin Mantle looked fairly anonymous in a long woolen dark grey coat and black leather gloves. However, to his other side, Cosmo Shanks had liberated a pair of black trousers, a jacket with a fleece-lined collar, and a pair of fur-topped snow boots. He now completed the ensemble with a long, deep green toweling dressing gown. You know what you look like, said Rafferty to Cosmo. I know what I look like, Cosmo replied. But what on earth do you look like? Asked Robin Mantle, pointedly staring towards Marley Jakes. Rafferty and Cosmo turned to see Marley Jakes kitted up in leggings, a long-sleeved t-shirt, a woman's summer dress complete with a frayed cardigan and pumps. Marley executed a little twirl and smoothed down the dress, which fitted reasonably well, although the leggings looked rumpled and lumpy. Why, oh why, would a lady throw away stuff like this? Marley Jakes asked. Because that's summer gear, declared Robin Mantle. Yeah, but a beautiful dress is a beautiful dress, and summer always comes round again. I shoplifted an item like this one time, Marley Jakes explained, after they wouldn't even allow me into the changing rooms to try it on. I'll never be able to afford it anyway. Now that should set off the whole thing nicely, declared Marley, reaching for a fine cotton scarlet scarf. Unfortunately, Robin Mantle had reached for the same garment. Marley Jakes grinned at the synchrony of their actions, but neither person was letting go. Scarf would look ridiculous on you, Jakes, pronounced Mantle, but it completely suits my attire. You should wind your neck in, Robin, or it might get very cold without this comforter. The two of them were instantly engaged in a tug-of-war with the scarf. Benefits, fraud, shoplifting, and now this, Mantle offered a disdainful top-to-toe appraisal of Jakes. A model citizen you are. We're all felons here, replied Cosmo. Don't forget your place, Robin. His place is looking down on the likes of us, Cosmo. Marley Jakes was warming up nicely, both inside and out. Even as he rummages around in a pile of second-hand clothes on Christmas Eve on the first day of his sentence for fraud, he takes the high ground. As I said, I'm not one of those low-life specimens cheating this country and fleecing poor business owners by shoplifting. Mantle held up his end of the scarf. It was an evidence exhibit. The one who has done the least harm should take the scarf. Oh, I was doing wrong by shoplifting. I admit it, Marley Jakes agreed, stepping towards Robin Mantle whilst winding the scarf round her hand. But do you reckon you're the one doing the least harm? It's men like you who are the ones fleecing this country, taking advantage of others like it's a birthright and avoiding paying your share. But privilege says you're entitled to it, doesn't it, Robin? There's no way you would consider blaming you. So let's take the easy way out, chaps, and spin the blame on the poor bastards playing the system who are just trying to get by. You know nothing of me and my background. I earned all my money, Mantle spat back, tugging firmly on the red umbilical between them. An accumulation of money does not mean an accumulation of wrongdoing to obtain it. I asked for no handouts. I've taken no benefits. I paid handsomely into the public purse and received not a thing in return. I took my chances and worked hard for it. And we didn't? Jakes returned, tugging with equal ferocity. My mother has 3 jobs on the go just to keep us barely afloat. 3. Sometimes starts at before 6 in the morning and often doesn't get back to 7 at night. She cleans for this bloke, whose working days include playing golf with clients and sitting down to schmooze and network in a restaurant. Fair enough. But the supercilious sob believes that because he has negotiated pay that is 20 times more than my mother's, he's worth 20 times more than her. He insists on making loud lectures about how lazy ordinary working people are. So while he's trying to hit par on hole 14, she's on her knees scrubbing away the shit stains in the toilet bowl. But no, he's the one working hard. He's the one who deserves all the rewards and the bonuses. He's the one who deserves to find accountants who sidestep the system, because he's entitled to it. He, apparently, is worth more than her. Not cut from the same cloth, are you, Robin? It's the natural law of economics, Mantle returned. People like me and your mother's boss generate jobs. It's business. It's naive, childish to think it's targeted or personal. It's corrupt and calamitous. That's what they should call it, calamitism. At least it'd be honest, rather than letting the rest of us believe that one day we might deserve more than food banks and benefits. Tell me, Jakes, what are you going to do when you arrive at your lefty utopia and find that the playing field is so level that there is no incentive for anyone to play the game at all? Robin Mantle did not wait for a response. Shall I tell you what will happen then? Society will collapse. Still the law of the jungle that drives us, but instead of predator and prey, it's profit and loss, the wealthy and the waster. We're still primitive creatures. We're just cavemen with pensions and portfolios. So stop defining your life by how others should be helping you and frame it by how you should be helping yourself. I was dealt a decent hand, granted. I played my hand well and helped myself and got rich by it, granted. But my wealth does not diminish you. You do that to yourself. Marley Jake's smile was so sour it challenged the weather with its bitterness. I don't mind you being so rich, but why do the rest of us have to be so poor? How do you live so heavily, with such heft and scale, when the rest of us barely scrape a living from the scraps? The question begged an answer, but other than a shake of the head, Robin Mantle was not providing it. Tell me, Robin, when I leave prison, my life is almost certainly going to be much harder with a prison record. When you leave prison, have you taken care of yourself and your fraud? Put it away where the authorities can't touch it? For a second time, Robin Mantle chose not to answer Marley Jakes. And you have the gall to talk about level playing fields. So yeah, Robin, I worked in a pub and claimed unemployment benefit, and even then, my mum and I only just made ends meet. No luxuries, Christmases on a budget, and the second time they caught me, they gave me 12 months. So now my mum, bless her, doesn't even have my wage coming in, and she can't afford the bus to come and see me inside, and I feel wretched about it, and I can't see any future but it. Your fraud is the same as my fraud. You're deceiving yourself to think otherwise. Mantle looked east and Shanks for support, but found none. Rafferty stepped in and relieved Mantle of his end of the scarf, gifting the garment to Marley Jakes. You look ridiculous, you know that. Mantle hoped he did not sound petulant. Tell him he looks ridiculous and an embarrassment. You wear that dress better than most women ever could, Rafferty declared. Marley beamed at him. Cosmo marched up to Marley. You look like an angel, he said as he towered above the small, thin figure. But you catch your death. Allow me. Cosmo draped a heavy purple coat over Marley's shoulders. It did not take long for the clothes to thaw and stiffen. The garments certainly afforded them better protection from the wind. Even though Marley Jakes and Cosmo Shanks looked fairly unique in their new outfits, it was still better than the self-consciousness of an obvious prison uniform. Marley looked just glamorous enough to be heading out for a works Christmas do, and Cosmo appeared as if he was setting sail for a fancy dress party in his own shoddy attempt at a Christmas spirit. Rafferty led the group forwards, finding propulsion all of his own with the thought that his wife was in labour and without him. Only as they passed a breathing huddle of material on a bench did the group halt to allow Cosmo to cover the homeless person with a blanket they had also liberated from the charity bin. All around them, people were rushing into warm buildings, escaping the chill night air to begin cosier celebrations on Christmas Eve. Occasionally, Cosmo or Marley would receive a cheer from a passing group of people, but both took it in good humour and bowed or curtsied in return, with one drunk even pressing a few coins into Cosmo's hand and broadcasting his deep wish that his team should not be relegated next year. After a while, Rafferty's pace began to take its toll. Although Cosmo's large strides had no trouble keeping up, Marley seemed to flag, and Robin Mantle complained that he just did not see the need for them to barrel along at this speed. Phone them, Marley eventually said. Phone the hospital and find out what's happening, Raph. Marley's advice made sense. As the father of the child, it would only be right and fitting for Rafferty to check on his wife's progress, even if he could not be present, and Cosmo wanted to call in the van accident, just to be entirely sure that the prison officers and the body of Bob Butcher had been found. Leaving Marley Jakes and Robin Mantle hunched in opposite corners of a bus shelter, Rafferty and Cosmo proceeded to search for a public phone box, but not one was to be found anywhere. They tried a new approach of appealing to doormen outside pub doors. "It's an emergency. We're going to use the phone. We'll be straight out." Yet all their entreaties fell on deaf ears, as the bouncers were not allowing anyone beyond the threshold without Christmas Eve tickets, and to a man and a woman they looked frostically sceptical that Rafferty East was telling the truth about his wife being in labour. After a handful of rejections, Rafferty and Cosmo headed down a side street away from the main parade of shops and bars, and soon came across a small, quiet, melancholy tavern called the Green Man. Plenty of people passed the pub, but not one of them gave the establishment even a fleeting look. There were no doormen on the threshold of Green Man because the pub did not enjoy an excess of popularity nor an excess of locals. On entering, Rafferty glanced at the small barroom and took in the small congregation of about half a dozen or so people, eking out the thinnest of Christmas cheer. Darkness and gloom seemed to set the ambience, with small islands of light illuminating a solemn customer here or an empty table there. Above the drab, exhausted-looking customers dangled drab, exhausted-looking Christmas decorations. In one corner, a squat Christmas tree blinked out a plea for rescue in its own visual Morse code. The only soundtrack to this Yuletide scene was of a bespectacled landlady rearranging glasses, but even she ceased its activity when she noticed the new arrivals. Rafferty and Cosmo's entrance was an event in the Green Man that evening, and it instantly drew the attention of all eyes. Cosmo approached the landlady to ask if they might use the public phone at the other end of the bar. "You'll have a drink first," she replied, without any attempt to phrase the response as a question. "We've got an urgent situation with friends waiting in the cold outside. Everyone's got a story here. Mary there doesn't want to go home because her partner's on shift work all night. At least they'll get the tail end of Christmas Day together. Joe hates going home to Lonely House, knowing that if anything happens to him, the only people who will notice are us when he doesn't come in for a stout the next evening. Betty lost her husband earlier this year, and both her children live abroad. Bill there lives on his own, but that's largely because Bill's a bit of a loon. Everyone's got a story. So what are you having, boys?" "It is an emergency, an actual emergency, and we've hardly any money," replied Cosmo, extracting the handful of coins the drunk with a wish had gifted him. "There's enough there to share half a pint of Hearty Badger," she replied, already pulling at the pump. Cosmo shrugged at Rafferty. Not needing any money to dial the emergency services, Cosmo lost no time in giving the operator the details of the crash. There was a brief pause as the operator consulted others, and then she relayed to Cosmo that the relevant authorities already knew about the incident, and both the police and ambulance services were attending. Holding up the handset of the phone so both he and Rafferty could listen in, when the emergency operator asked for his name, Rafferty nodded and Cosmo reeled off the names of the 4 prisoners, then hung up, although both prisoners guessed the operator knew their location already. Of course, when it came to Rafferty's turn to use the payphone, he realised he had no money to connect the call. His absence from the birth of his first child and his yearning to be there for his wife was an emergency to Rafferty, but there's no way he'd be able to convince an emergency operator this was the case and ask them to patch him through to the maternity ward. Explaining the situation in brief, Cosmo appealed to the landlady to help them. "I need payment, lads," she replied. "But you've just had payment for the half pint," Cosmo declared. "And I've traded a half pint for that payment. Now I need further payment. Bleak times." Furious, Cosmo marched towards the door, as if intending to storm out. At the threshold, he turned to face Rafferty, who remained by the phone, as if waiting for a miracle of connection. "You need payment," Cosmo declared, nodding to himself. The bespectacled landlady leant on the bar, intrigued by what this large, bearded man in snow boots and a green toweling dressing gown might do next. Cosmo peered around. He had the attention of the whole pub, such as it was. Standing up straight, Cosmo set his stare at nothing in particular and began to sing. "In the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan." Rafferty had already heard his fellow inmate singing that evening in the van, but was astonished by the sweetness of the voice now emanating from Cosmo's beard. Behind the bar, the landlady smiled and threw a glance at her clientele, who seemed confused rather than charmed. By the time Cosmo was repeating the words snow and on over and over again, he was throwing desperate, beseeching looks at Rafferty to join in with him. All too aware that he had no singing voice to speak of, when his fellow prisoner on the run started on the second verse, Rafferty was pleasantly surprised at how well his voice complemented Cosmo's own. Not conscious of ever having deliberately learned the carol, Rafferty was astonished at how effortlessly he knew the melody and lyrics. They were hardwired into his mind. For a brief moment, he was struck with the enigma of how so many people knew the lyrics to so many Christmas carols when these songs were only aired for a brief season once a year. By the time the pair of them began to sing a verse dominated by angels, Rafferty had come to the end of his lyrical knowledge of the carol and begun to hum the melody like a low, howling, squalling wind hunting across a midwinter moor. Yet they were now accompanied by everyone in the small pub, even Bill the loon. For a moment, the pub was in unison. Then all the voices faltered, but Cosmo's and Rafferty's, as a small, tipsy party of work colleagues from a local firm entered the Green Man, lured in by the singing and goodwill. Almost immediately, two members of the new party began joining in, one having a rich baritone voice, while another harmonised beautifully, their merry colleagues either joining in or ordering a round of drinks. When they finished on "Give my heart," the ensuing round of applause as everyone congratulated each other on synchrony in their singing rather than actual harmony. Cosmo caught the now busy landlady's eye. "Payment?" he mouthed. "Not yet," she mouthed back. Cosmo blew out his cheeks and expelled air noisily. "The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown." Almost instantly the work party joined in with the new melody, and soon other people, couples, groups from the street outside began to filter into the small pub as well. At the finish of the second carol, the landlady beckoned Cosmo and Rafferty towards the phone and put down a single coin. Enough money for one call. Rafferty had to go through two separate departments and then wait for an available midwife to explain the situation, all the time trying to hear over the now impromptu carol concert and praying that his money would not run out at any moment. Finally, the midwife came to the phone and explained that Annabelle, Rafferty's wife, was fine but tired. That the first part of the labour was a protracted one, but the baby seems well, but it's taken its time. "Annabelle is asking for you. Any idea when you might arrive?" Rafferty plumped for honesty. "Tell her I'm fine and not hurt, but I'm involved in a crash. I'll be there as soon as I can. Would you tell her that? Would you tell her I—" But his money had run out. Never mind. It was not too late. He still had time. Poor Annabelle must have been exhausted, but Rafferty still had time to make the berth and support her. On leaving the Green Man, Rafferty glanced back at the bar and took in the larger congregation of about a couple of dozen or so people appreciating the Christmas cheer. The darkness seemed tastefully pagan and reflective of midwinter, with small islands of light illuminating small groups engaged in conversation or belting out another Christmas carol. Above the newly energised customers dangled classy, traditional decorations. In one corner, the tidy little Christmas tree blinked out its own rhythms of light. The soundtrack to this Yuletide scene was an enthusiastic renditions of Christmas carols and a bespectacled landlady clinking away, busy with orders at the bar. No one noticed Cosmo and Rafferty exiting the Green Man. As they walked back towards their companions, Rafferty explained to Cosmo about the situation with Annabelle in the maternity ward, but he tailed off as they approached the bus shelter. Something beyond an altercation, something ferocious, something violent was happening. Rushing forward into the ruckus, Rafferty and Cosmo shoved back the group of a handful of men who were punching and kicking the prone figure of Marley Jakes. The men were clearly on the wrong side of Mary and their blood was up. They turned, snarling, towards Rafferty and Cosmo, who stood over the groaning figure of Marley Jakes. Rafferty conducted a quick scan of the area, concerned about Robin Mantle's whereabouts and condition, when he spotted the man blending into the background beyond the group, unharmed. Mantle had clearly abandoned Marley Jakes to the beating. "What's this about, lads?" asked Cosmo. "What's it to you?" A muscular young man in a short-sleeved shirt spat back, nodding on the word "it" to indicate the insult was intended for Marley Jakes. "They're a friend." "Ah, yeah, right, a friend." The man nodded and turned away to grin at his fellows. Rafferty knew what was coming. He'd seen such a reaction a couple of times in prison already that felt like enacting a cliche. The bravado feint off to the side, and then the sudden threat of violence. And there it was. A knife. However, the short-sleeved muscular man was slightly taken aback when brandishing the blade because it had no effect on Cosmo Shanks. "Is this what it's about?" asked Cosmo. "You go to town on someone just because you're an ignorant bigot." "What did you call me?" "If you're not listening to what I'm saying, you're stupid as well as ignorant as well as a bigot. That's practically a full house of twatitude right there, son." The group were gathering an audience, and so many witnesses was alarming the short-sleeved muscular man with the knife. But the young man could not lose face now, and even though Cosmo Shanks was bigger than him, he took a threatening step closer. Cosmo had out his hands. "This is how it starts. It's how it started for me anyway. A stupid decision, a thoughtless decision, someone badly hurt. Might have been me holding that knife 20 years ago." Cosmo pulled open the jacket beneath the dressing gown to reveal a section of the prison-issue boiler suit. "See this, gents? See this fetching luminous number I'm wearing? Know what it is? Escape risk uniform, courtesy of been detained at Her Majesty's pleasure." The group of men seemed confused. "You're telling us your prisoner's on the run?" "East's on the run. Got a biological appointment. Me? I'm more on a bit of a Christmas mooch," Cosmo explained, still absolutely unfazed by the knife not 4 feet in front of him. "Now, one of you fellas is going to take out his phone, and he is going to call an ambulance for Marley here, or I will identify you all. I'm good with faces, and God forbid you end up serving a stretch in the same prison as me." But someone had already dialed the police at the start of the fight, and the approaching sirens convinced the group of men to make a run for it. Cosmo leant down and spoke tenderly to the fallen figure of Marley Jakes. "Marley, the emergency services are on their way. How are you, Angel?" "Adventure ends here for me tonight, Cosmo," Jakes murmured, squinting in pain and dribbling blood onto the pavement. "Marley, I've got to go," Rafferty whispered apologetically. "If I stay here, by the time the police process me, there's no way I'll make the berth in time." Almost imperceptibly, Marley nodded and mumbled, "Go to her." "Even after a beating, you're still rocking that dress," Cosmo added. Marley's smile transformed into a wince. Making Marley Jakes as comfortable as they could, Rafferty and Cosmo slipped in amongst the gathering crowd, then slunk away across the street into the shadows when the police arrived. From their hidden vantage point, the two men witnessed Robin Mantle hindering the police in their efforts by claiming he was a convict who had unwittingly escaped. These officers had not yet heard about the news of the crashed van, however, and firmly advised Mantle to stop wasting police time as they were busy with the casualty. As Rafferty and Cosmo marched off further into the city, Robin Mantle caught up with them. He was now wearing the scarlet scarf he and Marley Jakes had fought over earlier. "There are blockages in public toilets with more class than you, Mantle," Cosmo declared. "What need had Jakes for it? He'll be spending Christmas in a nice, warm hospital bed." "Did you even help?" "Jakes didn't help himself. If he just weathered their slights instead of stirring them up, provoking them like it was some vital cause." Mantle shrugged his shoulders. He was clearly unrepentant. "If Jakes wasn't going to help himself, then I was going to help myself to this. We all help ourselves. Jake's in the best hands now. He was just a drag on us." Cosmo cast a first-degree stare in Mantle's direction. "I hope that scarf chokes you."